Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, and this is the meeting of the Policing Reform Committee for February 10, 2021. So let's start off with announcements and updates. This is a new section or a meeting that was suggested by, I think, Marty, to give members an opportunity to say something, make announcements, express opinions about world events or local events. So if anyone has anything to say, this is the time to say it. Oh, Marty, I knew you'd say something.
Well, no, I'm going to say I'm not sure I suggested this one.
Well, who did?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good idea. It happens at select board meetings, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You suggested via email, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
At least I saw that. But
anyway, I'll take credit where credit might not be due.
Okay.
I can make a brief announcement if that's okay.
Great.
I mean, this is not an announcement. I'm not sure if this is quite what we're thinking about here, but I was reading about the Policing Reforms Committee in Newton, and there was a recent article about a survey they did of employees of the Newton Police Department, and I thought that was kind of an interesting idea that nobody's, to my knowledge, done here, and it might be interesting to know from people in the department how they're feeling and where they think policies could be changed.
I think that's a great idea. Matter of fact,
but yeah, just something that I read about that I thought was interesting.
Oh, I actually attended the meeting in Newton virtually, thank goodness, where those findings were reported. So one thing to note is that the survey, unfortunately, that they did in Newton about how police officers were feeling happened after the shooting. So, that definitely, the researchers who they contracted with to do the survey, made a point of saying that may be a factor in the responses, and they only had 44 responses. And I think the timing of that probably affected it. However, one thing that was really interesting is that they asked an overlap of questions that they did two surveys. They did one to the community and then one to the police department. And they made sure to ask the same questions, at least some of them, to both, so that they could see sort of how the community perceived and how the police officers perceived those same issues. And I thought that was really interesting and a good idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Casey, go ahead.
So Michael, yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think there's some really great information that you can gather by asking people that are actually doing the work, how they feel about the work that they're doing. And I think Officer Keaveney, Detective Keaveney would agree with me to say that there are many things that we're doing that I think all of us agree we shouldn't be. And there's this misnomer in the community saying that the police department is like so against reform. And I will just say, we are reforming policing all the time. I've been with the police department for 22 years, and we are constantly changing and evolving and, evaluating our policies and procedures and the way we conduct ourselves. And, I don't get any sense from the department that we are opposed to change and reform and improvement. Yeah. I think we were opposed to having, $2 million cut from our budget and losing bodies and having everything ripped out away from the community that we serve without anything put in place. But, we are trying to be really a productive part of this process. And I think asking officers how they feel would have been a great thing to do at the onset. I mean, I think no one knows policing better than those that are doing it.
Yeah, I think there's also another reason, and that is Elizabeth's committee on personnel is looking at issues of officer wellness, and we have and retention too. And we have some information, but it would be useful to get additional information with respect to how officers and their family members are impacted by the discussions in town conditions of their work life or whatever, as well as get some sense of, some of the problems we're having with that it is said we're having with retention of officers. So I'd actually like to suggest that, the appropriate committee sort of look into doing that. I mean, it's going to, continue beyond the, presentation to the select board, but that's that would be such an important thing to do that we should sort of begin that process.
And then somewhat relatedly to this, I mean, I think this is complementary to what we just talked about, but I think it would be really important. I think it's really important that we start having a community dialogue, and that includes the department, but it's also beyond the department, about who our next police chief, I mean, generally speaking, who our next police chief is going to be. It sounds like that search hasn't started, which is good in that we can start having those conversations. But I think having a community, starting to have community meetings, either under the auspices of the town or jointly with the town and some community groups, and just sort of hearing people's feedback on that would help start that conversation. And if our feedback is expected to inform the search, we should probably start thinking systematically about it.
So are you suggesting that should be a task or a project of the committee?
Yeah, I'm not sure which subcommittee, and maybe after, maybe all it takes is just organizing a meeting and just hearing from the public on this. I don't think it requires that much more at this point, but I think just having some official forum where people can talk about this issue, so we get some sense of what at least the engaged public thinks, might be helpful.
Okay, so what subcommittee would do that? I don't mean to be bureaucratic, but I am. What subcommittee would do that? And I think the way it should be set up is a recommendation of the subcommittee to the select board for the continuation of the work of the committee to include that particular task. Does that make sense?
Mel has his hand raised. I don't know if that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mel.
I just want to say that it was always my intent that one of the reasons for the deferral of the process was to gain input from the community, especially as this process of the reimagining and the reform task forces or committees went forward. I didn't really think about a process. I think at some point the select board will probably have some of their own process around that, but I think whatever you can do to jumpstart that would be good.
Yeah, and I think this committee could actually see that as a way of informing the community about the recommendations we make generally, identifying the type of characteristics for a police commissioner that we think would be important based on the research that we've done. So
I would just say, when we go into this process, we're likely to select a consultant to help us, not unlike what you see in Newton going on to make it a really competitive search. And we don't want to get too far ahead of that process, but I think some general qualities and some of the concepts that the committees are talking about, I think will inform the process.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. Not just additional bit of information data. So what subcommittee should do both of those two things?
Bernard.
Yeah.
I'm using the hand raise feature, but
For some reason it's not popping up on my.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, so a couple of questions. Just before I forget, getting back to the survey of the officers, is that anonymous, and who's going to design that survey? I think that's a more immediate question than the police chief.
Whatever committee takes us on is going to have to address that problem, as well as number of other problems, such as what type of questions, are they good, valid questions for purposes of getting valid information.
Well, that's what I'm concerned about, because I see that as a more immediate issue than the chief issue, because I have a comment on that as well. And then you get into questions, is it anonymous? Do we try to get officers to identify their ethnic background, or, you know, and their rank, that kind of question. Anyway, so I do think that should be delegated soon. And I'm not volunteering the accountability committee, but I don't know who should do it.
Well, I'd like to, Elizabeth, I don't mean to burden you any more than I already have, but you're in the right place at the wrong time.
I knew this was coming. I'm sorry, Bernard.
I can certainly help with survey design. I mean, honestly, the laziest but not obviously wrong way to do this is just to look at whatever Newton's questions were,
Yeah,
since they should be public records. And that has the added advantage of, to the extent that it's useful, we can make comparisons between Brookline and Newton. But that, if we do it like that, it's not particularly labor intensive, the actual survey design. I don't know.
I think we
Open to
can
other
have
thoughts.
Already,
something.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Janice.
Yeah, Newton has already put together a very extensive document regarding what they're looking for in a police chief. And we are our unique town. However, I think it is guiding, you know, that we don't have to start from zero.
yeah,
Can really begin to think. It may sort of get us thinking about the kinds of things that we do actually want to do in Brookline, the qualities that we're looking for.
and so that has to do with, okay, we're talking about two things. One, the survey of the police and other employees, which is not related to Newton. Or I guess it is.
Well, yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but still, there's two different things. One is surveying the employees of the police department to find out what their feelings are about various things. And the other apparently is characteristics we would like to have in our next police chief, which is largely a separate kind of a thing.
Okay.
So
So-
I thought we were what Michael was suggesting had to do with the first question of surveying employees of the Brookline Police Department to find out where they are,
Yeah.
and doing it in a way that makes it possibly comparable with the survey that Newton did of the employees of their police department. Am I correct, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I apologize, I was momentarily confused.
Well, he brought up both. I want to address the second one as well.
Okay, let me just say that I think the personnel subcommittee, should take the survey on, because they are looking at issues of officer wellness, and that ties into that very well. In terms of the second thing, organizing hearings, maybe that should just be something that the committee as a whole does.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do much more than just schedule a hearing, which
Right.
doesn't strike me as
that's-
particularly labor intensive.
That's the other thing I wanted to ask about is, we haven't really talked about a public hearing schedule. I have personally not favored too many public hearings. I think there's a point of diminishing returns in terms of hearing from people and who's gonna, there's certain people we'll hear from all the time, which I welcome. But there are other people that will only come once. And we haven't really talked about that. I do think it was, I was one of many. It was a consensus to add some public comment to every meeting, which I think is important and good.
Yeah.
But can we talk a little about what we're going to do for public hearings, or more than, I hope it'll be one. But the
Yeah.
question that dovetails with the chief issue, because I think whatever we do, it should be combined with that.
I think, well, we have a public hearing scheduled for February 24th.
For-
And
For this committee,
yeah,
and will we have draft reports for people to see by then?
that's the plan.
Because that's creeping up very fast. It
I
seems to
know.
me that I don't even remember agreeing on February 24th. I mean, I guess I'm wondering,
Well, we have our presentation to the select board, which doesn't have to be the final chapter in this committee, but that's on March 3rd. So February 24th really is the only or the last date that we have to have such a hearing. And we're going to have an additional meeting next week. And, hopefully, I think that the reports are in fairly good shape. I mean, it's going to take some work, and I'm going to propose a drafting committee to actually, finalize things. I think they're in fairly good shape. A little rough, but I think we can get to the finish line here.
well, that raises a related question, which I did want to bring up as well. We haven't really talked about how long the committee is going to exist and when is the final report. And are we going to do a second public hearing then? And that starts to get into my diminishing returns. That'll be the third public hearing within a year. And I just,
Okay, but I think, what the nature of the continuation of the committee, how long, et cetera, is going to be a function of the recommendations that come out of the subcommittees. I mean, some of the recommendations are to complete certain specific tasks within a certain period of time. And, those tasks, will be done by the subcommittee or the full committee. And that will determine, when we end this thing.
Bernard,
Yes, who's that?
I want, Raj.
Raj.
Yes, on surveying the police force and also as it relates to the what qualities, etc., the new police chief should have, I think we should get outside professional help, because I think as simple as some of these things look, they are complicated and they ought to have help or input from professionals who have done this kind of work elsewhere.
I think that's always been done, right, Bernard or Mel?
What do you mean?
In the past. I think there has been. In fact, I thought I heard
Well,
Mel.
in terms of hiring the police chief, I mean, there's going to be a professional process involving.
That's what I mean. Isn't that what Raj is
But
asking about?
I thought we were talking about hearing to gather public input in on what the characteristics the public thinks the police chief should have. And we don't need professional help in that.
I thought Raj was talking about professional help.
For the survey.
Okay, for the survey,
Yes.
well, we'll have to see how much money we have.
There are surveys and surveys and surveys.
Yeah, we know that.
And a little twist of how a question is asked and what questions are asked can give you a very different result. So I think that some folks who have done that kind of work should be the ones preparing the questions and conducting a survey. That's what I was saying.
Well, okay, we should think about that in the personnel subcommittee. We had a professional survey done by Tufts for the reimagining committee. And a lot of the issues that you raised, were found there. So, I mean, there are people on this committee who know more about this than I do.
Yeah, I think Raj is
Probably
right, but I think
everyone.
we're really blessed in Brookline that like 15% of the population has a doctoral degree. I mean, including like people like Janice, and in May, people like me. So I think there are a lot of us who've done this kind of work before. So.
Well, the other thing is we're talking about a small pool of people. We're not looking for how you get a statistically accurate sample, which actually I'm not yet convinced that the reimagining survey really did that. But for a discrete number of officers, which is, what do we have, about 120, 130 or something?
Yeah.
You don't have to get into those issues. So that's
Well,
even much more
you still want it
complicated.
to, you still want them to be able to give unbiased not feel like that you're leading kinds of questions. So, you know, there's still that aspect of it, but yeah, you're not doing a sample, hopefully you're doing a whole census. So so some things are you don't have to consider as strongly, but the wording of the questions I still think is important.
For sure. Nobody disputes that, I think.
Yeah.
I think this conversation's probably not best had in this large group.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to raise that idea here because I thought it was useful, and I'm happy to, I mean, maybe after March is a good way to think about executing this. But I think kind of putting that on the radar for then might be good.
Okay, so why don't you and Ron and Janice, if you don't mind, Janice, give some thought to that and maybe even circulate some ideas, and you know, let's do that through the personnel committee.
Well, I don't know if Ron and I are on it, but however.
Oh no, so maybe we're talking about a separate committee, the new subcommittee.
Can we be a working group? Because a subcommittee of 3 sounds really bad, you know, because then I can't email Ron without it being an OML.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so make it a working group. A gathering of friends.
And in terms of when we push it off, I don't know if we're releasing recommendations to the full select board in March. I don't know what the point is of asking the police what they think about any of this after that and after votes are taken. I know we have a lot of work that we're doing. I mean, I think it's a worthy conversation to have, you know, in consideration of what it is that we're looking to recommend.
Well, one thing that I think is, once we publicize draft reports, I think that the officers in the department should see those as well. And I think that's, I guess maybe I'm missing something, that this seems more complicated to some of you than to me. But it seems to me that Elizabeth, with the help of those who have stepped forward now, could put something together pretty quickly. And I think it, usually I'm the one that wants to be slow and careful and OCD, etc. But on this one, it seems to me it's not that complicated.
Okay.
I think we could get the input of the police officers. I think it would be really valuable in terms of any kind of implementation steps. So you're right, we probably should have done this earlier, but it's not too late because we're making recommendations that this would really inform how that gets implemented, I think.
Okay.
Can I impose on my union president to maybe suggest that someone from our executive board maybe work with Elizabeth and the working group on doing that? Because they have just framing the questions, and
that would be great.
I was going to jump in on that. You know, we would appreciate it if you took the input from the union. I think we could be very valuable and helpful.
Yeah.
In that part of it, we've done our own surveys in the past, and they've been very successful. I think it would be helpful that we could help formulate the questions so they're asked in the right manner. And you know,
I think that would be awesome, Michael. I mean, the input we've gotten so far, I would just say the input Michael has given us so far has been invaluable. So there's just no question that more of that kind of input would be very useful.
I could also pipe in on the conversation about the chief search. You know, I think that, you know, I understand there's a process and all that, and I think it needs to take precedent. It needs to be it needs to take front and center. Leadership is important in a police department, and filling the vacancies and the openings. It will create a stability that's lacking at the moment, and I think it's important that we get that stability back. And it encourages officers. It makes them feel better and comfortable. And you know, I can't emphasize more strongly how, you know, I understand we need to put together a committee and use an outside agency, but we have extremely, we got great candidates currently working in the police department. I can't emphasize that more strongly. And
So I
if you just-
compare that
Right.
to school committee or the head of the school department in Brookline. The search for that was far and wide, and this is a similar kind of a thing.
Right, and that one led us to hire somebody from within.
For
Maybe
a short
that's
period of
okay.
time.
There's nothing says that that shouldn't or couldn't happen.
Okay, so let's move on. Hey, by the way, I apologize for not mentioning Casey or Michael as part of this group, because of course they're essential. So if one of you or whoever would hook up with the rest of them, that would be great. Elizabeth, can I ask you to sort of quarterback this, meaning send out the emails to people?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Okay, any other comments?
Just one more question on this one. If I'm right that this could be done quickly, is there a chance we could get a draft by next week and try to get this done before the public hearing?
Yeah, let's try to do that.
There you go, Elizabeth. That's what you get for nodding your head.
Thanks,
so-
Marty.
So
I'll give you a
Mike,
call later.
I'm already working with 3
they
separate
have,
subcommittees.
someone mentioned that they could get access to the Newton survey questions. So was that you, Michael?
No, I think that was Janice, but I
Okay,
thought
Janice,
I'm
Could
happy to do it. I'm
okay,
happy to do that.
circulate that around. Matter of fact, why don't you give it to Devin so she can put it in our
I don't
file.
have it. I don't have it right now. I went to the meeting where they presented their findings. So, but I have all the contact information, so I can do that quickly.
If you have
Okay.
any trouble, I know 2 members of their committee.
All right, Marty. If I need extra help, I was actually going to reach out to the contracting agency,
Oh,
the agency that actually did the survey.
all right, I withdraw my suggestion.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move on. Meeting minutes, question of approving minutes from January 27, 2021. They're online. I understand that Marty had some comments, but
I gave them last night, earlier than usual. I
okay.
don't know if you or Devin got to look at them.
Could you, no, I haven't. I was doing Zoom last night.
As usual, my
Zoom.
comments are ignored.
Yeah. Could you briefly, very briefly, indicate what were they substantive or were they?
Well, I thought actually, I've been very impressed by the minutes prior to this. I thought it was a little sketchy on like Howard Friedman's presentation, for instance. So I actually, believe it or not, try to keep some notes during these meetings. And so I added more than usual. So if you want to hold it for next week, that's up to you and as the chair.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea to hold it for next week. And his presentation was important enough for us to have as full a full report on it as possible. So
In fact, there were some things where committee members' questions were put in without anything about how he answered.
yeah, okay,
So you'll see what I did. I sent when you get a chance.
This
okay.
is Devin. Just to clarify, and I'm happy to do this moving forward, and obviously the committee will vote on these minutes next week, so I can update whatever of Marty's suggestions are applicable. But I have been under the assumption that really we're trying to capture the essence of discussion and votes in meeting minutes, especially because all of these are recorded and publicly posted on the town's website. So the actual, discussions and feedback and all of that can be watched if people wanted. I've always been sort of like a bare bones minutes taker, as they are traditionally just supposed to capture votes. But if that is changing or you have a different perspective for this particular meeting, I'll look forward to the committee's, vote next week.
I guess you should do the minutes bare bones, but where there's reports or interviews, members of the committee can sort of add comments. Like, I don't know, that seems to work. So that's how we'll do it for this set of minutes, and also for well, we already done McDevitt, so okay, let's move on. So we'll take those up next week. You don't have any pre-meeting educational topics? We had that interesting discussion under announcements to take its place. So let's go straight to subcommittee updates. I guess I'd like to start off with suggesting a drafting committee for our report. We're gonna have a bunch of reports. Many of them are very, very long, very detailed. I'd like to put together a group of 3, with the help of non-members to put the report in a coherent sort of outline, as well as making sure that the text of the report is coherent and hangs together. So one person, no, Marty, I don't want you on the committee. I'm sorry. Are you volunteering for the committee
right now? I'm trying to juggle them.
Yeah. From the accounting committee, I'd like to ask Michael, because he's a very good writer. And let's see, and Paul Yee, if you don't mind. You have the type of background as well as you write well for this. And I'll be on the committee too. I don't think we should have more than that. It's just a drafting working group. Anyone
That's
object to
fine
that?
with me, but I have 2 questions. I assume that we'll all get to see a draft with time to reply and make suggestions.
Yeah, my thinking is that as we put this together, it will be on the Google Docs, I guess. We should get all the reports, even in their raw form, on Google Docs. And as we put it together into a report, it'll be on Google Docs, and people can monitor it in real time.
Okay, my second question was, I'm guessing, but we haven't really talked about it. Will there be some kind of overview by you, or an introduction of?
My thinking is that I'll put together an overview that can be sort of a executive summary, and highlighting the key points, and that will also be worked on by the drafting committee. Okay, so with that in place, what I'd like to do with the subcommittee updates is have the chairs really emphasize the recommendations that are coming out of their reports. Or in the case of, I guess, the accountability committee, the recommendations will be the various documents that you're proposing, PCAC, for example, and others. So let's start off with the accountability committee.
Yeah, same, not too much to report. The same 3-4 things that we've been working on. The PCAC, the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee, which we essentially have a finished draft of, which is in the packet. And it's my hope that the full committee can vote on this next week, not today, obviously. So I hope that, if it's something you're interested in providing feedback on, that you have the chance to look at it. There's also an explanation, like 2 pages or so, about the motivation and function of the committee. And so, you can look at that too, perhaps. So we're continuing to work on that. We're continuing to, as a subcommittee, we basically approved the civilian the civilian feedback form, feedback on police encounters that Ron has been working on. We voted to approve the questions and the policy. I'm not really sure if that means now that the full committee should have a vote on those documents or what. But that's something that I would like, us to move forward with. I'm not sure that I saw those in the packet, but maybe I'm wrong. And then,
Yeah.
Ron, or do you want to do something?
No, I just wanted to say I was hoping we could vote on it today, but if it's a concern about it, there not being in a packet, I don't know. Can someone give a ruling on that? I mean, we can always put them up on the screen, but people have had a chance to look at the general content before now, so. I'd like a ruling on that. I mean, we could vote on it next week as well as this week, but I was hoping we would get out of the way this week.
This is Devin. Votes do need to be noticed on the agenda. So if there's ever something that you'd like to be voted on, I'll just need to know about it before preparing the agenda so we can add that language and possible vote.
Okay.
And I can do that for next week if you just want to send me all the materials.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and your materials were not in the packet, so make sure that you get them to Devin with instructions to put them in the packet. And in general, I would like everyone on the committee to read every report. I know that's a burden, but that's welcome to my world. So that next week and the following week, if people have recommendations or critiques or just suggestions to the various committee reports, we can hear them out and incorporate what's relevant into the reports. And of course, most importantly, since we're going to be voting on it next week, the PCAC and the feedback form that Ron's putting together, you absolutely have to review those with respect to this committee.
So that settles those issues. There are a couple hands raised, and that's really captivating me right now. So maybe I should pause and.
Okay. I do not see hand raised.
Okay, Paul and Marty have their hands raised.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to call on them or.
Paul?
Sure. I think the materials were in the packet because I read. I think there were like 2 or 3 documents by the accountability committee. So the one I have a comment on is the recommendation for a change in the manual on part 3, and it's about the duty to intervene to change that part of the manual. I think that was part of your committee.
Yeah, that's something we've discussed a bit, and it's in the report. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So the new Police Reform Act has a whole section on that. And I just wondered if you had taken that into account.
Not deeply.
So it's in chapter 6E, which is the certification part of the new act. And it's section 30. So if you go to section 30 of the new act, chapter 253 of the acts of 2020, there's a section on that.
Okay.
And it's, so the statutory reference would be chapter 6E, which is a new chapter that section 30 established, right? It'd be section 15, and that talks about the duty to intervene.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's important. I mean, this new reform legislation has sort of thrown this curveball, and there's a lot to incorporate.
Yeah, it's not obvious to me that it's bad for our manual to duplicate the state law. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things in our policy, like the chokehold ban is now redundant with the state law's chokehold ban, but it's definitely something to look at, and maybe they have useful language. So I appreciate that feedback.
The other thing, we got a grant recently for a program called ABLE, which is has to do with bystander intervention by police.
Yeah.
And it's a training program, so we should mention that too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think somehow that got to me. I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just like a PDF about that, maybe from Mark through Dan.
Yeah, okay.
But that's,
It,
yeah.
it just it just requires a reference, maybe even a footnote.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Marty
Who
also
else?
has
Marty,
his-
okay. I'm not sure what's wrong with my screen here. I'm not seeing any hand raises.
I'll be your eyes, I guess.
Okay.
You have
Or
partic-
people can use their hand the old-fashioned way. Okay.
Do you have
Marty.
do you have participants, a window for participants?
Yep.
And you don't see hand? All right, well, anyway.
Yeah, I can see them.
Oh, okay. In the participants window, but sometimes it's on the screen, and that's what I was looking for.
Oh,
Okay. So I'll stay in this window.
well, anyway, in fact, I'm not sure what I raised my hand for, but I do have a reaction to, because I think it got addressed and I took my hand down and then I put it back up when Paul was talking, because I'm not sure if Paul thinks that we're looking for a vote on that duty to intervene. That's a separate issue that's not yet ready for prime time. I mean, we've hardly talked about the exact language for that, but that raises a bigger question for me, which is the one thing, well, the police survey came up today. That was a wonderful new idea. But there is one thing that I don't think we're doing in a comprehensive way, and I actually don't think we'll be capable of doing it in whatever time frame we have, which is a thorough review of the entire policies procedures manual. And I've glanced at some things that I've conveyed some ideas to Paul about racial profiling, for instance, but none of us is really trying to do that, and I don't think we can in the near future. And I'm hoping, that would be something for the PCAC, assuming that gets successfully formed. But the duty to intervene just reminds me that there's probably, 20 or 30 paragraphs in that manual that might be improved a little bit. There's a few that we've started talking about, and on accountability, we've started talking about conduct on becoming an officer. I have given some ideas to Paul. I haven't done a redlining addressing the racial profiling issue. Some ideas on diversion. But anyway, the point is that there's only going to be so many things that we're going to be able to do out of the manual, and duty to intervene is probably an important issue. I haven't looked at what we have in the manual now, and I'm just trying to talk out loud about how do we come up with a process to decide what things to look at. Is it just whatever anyone thinks of? That's kind of I don't know if that question is even decipherable, but.
Well, I think what you're suggesting is that instead of proposing a duty to intervene provision of the manual, we need to maybe assign that to the PCAC, assuming it gets adopted, so that they can look at all the parts of the manual that address that and related issues. So we come up with a proposal that's coherent.
Well, no matter what we do, I do believe that the PCAC mandate would be on an ongoing basis to look at policies of the police department, which is basically the manual.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, we'll recommend some things and the PCAC will look at others. I think that's totally fine. I'm happy to talk more about these suggestions at our subcommittee meetings. As far as finishing the update, we're also continuing to work on the complaints policy, and we've made some progress on how mediation is discussed in that policies and procedures, and also some housekeeping about redundant language and so on. But we're still working on that, and I'd like to finish that some point in the near future, but there's still, I think, some significant work to do. So I'm hoping that our subcommittee can try to identify discrete chunks of that and make some progress on it. But yeah, as far as, just for next week, I guess the important things to think about are that we hope to vote on the PCAC next week. So, please review the draft and explanation as soon as you can. And we hope to vote on the civilian feedback form and accompanying policies and procedures next week. So if that's something you're, you should review those things too, and reach out to Ron or to me if you need help finding them. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
One
Marty.
more, another question. If we're talking about a public hearing, what was the date, the 26th,
24th.
24th? It strikes me that we should not vote on the PCAC until the public has a chance to look at that. Sorry.
Well, except that we don't have any meetings after that. We're running out of time.
I'm talking about having that part of the public hearing.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Why should we vote on it before we hear from the public? I don't think that's right.
I mean, I've heard from, I don't know how we think about the public here, but I've definitely heard from people who aren't on our subcommittee or even on this committee about it. Positive and negative feedback. I'm happy to try to circulate that again in advance. We've had subcommittee open mics on it, and we will next week as well. So I think, I'm not particularly, we can invite the public to send emails on this particular topic. There's a lot of things to talk about at the public hearing. I don't think it's particularly important to postpone the feedback form in the PCAC until then.
Yeah.
I really disagree. I'm sorry to be stubborn, but I am a Taurus. It seems to me it defeats the purpose of a public hearing to adopt things without letting the participants at the public hearing comment on them. What is the big rush on these things?
Big rush is we're running out of time.
Well, it's just a draft report for the March 8th or whatever date it is. The whole point of a public hearing is to allow the public to have input on proposals. These two things are the most concrete proposals we've had since the chokehold ban, and that was a no-brainer. I don't think we needed a public hearing on that, but these things we do, and there's going to be a lot of, I was about to say a lot of people, there'll be a certain group of people that will object to the PCAC because it's too weak. One of them is probably on our committee, and they should have a chance to. This just really seems wrong to me to jump the gun and pass this a week before the public hearing. Why not let the public comment, and we could put on the agenda for our next meeting?
Yeah, it's not a particularly important thing, I suppose, to do it 1 week earlier rather than 1 week later. My perspective is just that I've been getting feedback from people not on this committee since maybe December. And we've had a public hearing last Monday, and we're having a public hearing at the subcommittee again on Monday.
Well, it's not a public hearing unless it's called as a public hearing, and that's not what I didn't mean to, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, again,
that's not a public hearing.
I don't particularly mind waiting a couple weeks to allow folks to say things in a public forum about it that they may or may not have shared in other places before. Or, if we get new feedback, that'd be phenomenal. So I don't mind. I don't know if Ron minds. I don't know if Ron minds about delaying the feedback forum as well.
Yeah. What about having our public hearing on the 17th and, then wrap things up on the 24th?
But the problem with that is that we haven't got the draft reports done. I've got comments on 3 of them that I haven't even sent
We'll have
in.
enough of the reports that people can make comments to, and then we'll use their comments in finalizing the reports.
Is that public hearing jointly with the task force or just us?
Just us.
And I guess I'm not understanding why it has to be changed. But
well, I've changed to accommodate you, Marty.
No, I thought a perfect sequence is publish these proposals, publish the draft reports, which I don't want to advance by a week, and do the public hearing on the date you said. I'm
And
not
then
sure.
when do we make revisions to the reports, which is what you said you wanted, based on the public hearing?
Well, I'm not anticipating a huge number. It seems to me that could be done within a few days afterwards.
Okay, so why don't we keep the public hearing on the 24th? We take public comments, and if there are proposed changes, we can vote at that meeting on them. Does that make sense to everyone?
I agree with Marty that we should hear from the public before we take the vote. I think you're right, Marty, about that. And whether we do it at that meeting, if we can do it then, or if we have to do it a week later, I know it's a hassle, but I think this is Brookline and everybody gets to speak.
But the
And-
problem with
and that's part of
voting
what
on it,
makes us great.
I'm sorry, the
right?
problem on voting on it problem with voting on it a week later is that our presentation to the select board is prior to our next week's meeting. And so if we have the public hearing on the 24th and we're supposed to make changes on it, this committee won't be able to see those changes until after this has already been presented to the select board.
Maybe we need to have a meeting before that then.
Yeah.
A different time. I think Marty's right about the process. I think.
No, I tend to
yeah, I
agree,
think
actually.
That's
Okay.
the right stuff.
Can I propose an abusive idea, and that is we meet on the 1st of March just for the purpose of voting on whatever it is that comes out of the public hearing.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
Okay, is that a Monday?
Yeah. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Okay. See, there's solutions to everything. Okay, next. Civil rights, militarization, and mass events.
So we did
Wait a
meet,
minute, wait, but I want to, something I need.
I'm
to-
sorry.
So does that mean we're not voting at all on the those two proposals, the ACAC and the civilian feedback form at all at next week's meeting?
I would like to vote on them, subject to any changes that we vote from the public hearing.
Okay, okay, I
I
like
mean,
that. Too. Okay.
I mean, I think we can do that. I mean, I think that makes sense. And it makes it easier because it's unlikely to be major revisions to the documents out of the public hearing. And, you know, we can
Okay,
do those
yeah,
on
that's
Monday.
fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep talking, but can I just say, what I like about that, because I see Marty shaking his head, is that I think it focuses people on the committee's attention, because when we vote on the full document, we're talking about like 100+ pages. And I think it's just really unlikely that folks are going to be able to, like, on this committee, are going to review all of that before the vote. So I think it's nice to have some chunks handled discreetly, just to focus people on this committee's attention in a way that's manageable.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure I'm against it. It just sounds kind of strange to me to take a tentative vote, then ask for public comment, and then what do? Take another vote?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly
Later?
what we're talking about. So that's why we have the Monday meeting. If there are any changes that further changes that need to be made, we'll vote on Monday. Yeah, I mean, it's weird, but that's.
No, the idea of, I mean, legislators do this all the time, is they have multiple readings of a bill and they vote on it multiple times. It's not exactly weird to treat it like that.
You lost me when you talk about legislators. Now
Okay,
I'm
let's
against
move
it.
on. Civil rights, militarization, and mass events. Mr. Yee.
All right, so as I said, we did meet. I'm glad to report that Marty has joined our committee. Thank you, Marty. He's been there as an interloper for the last few meetings, and we finally made it official. So thank you.
I didn't
for your
really agree to
contribution.
it, but I didn't say no.
Okay, come on, let's move on.
All right, so our report is coming together. Just I received, well, it's just several sections to it. I received two sections that we needed, just two other sections that we still need to add to it. So it's not ready for your eyes yet. But I'd just like to give you a preview of where we are at. So one section is about racial profiling, obviously. That's part of our charge for the subcommittee. We went over the data for the last 3 years. I think the report will take most of the racial profiling materials and just give a sense to you and the community about what is the status of racial profiling in Brookline. And in very summary fashion is that more non-residents are being stopped for traffic stops, being stopped for field interrogation and arrest than residents. So there is a disparity between residents and non-residents. If you look inside of that resident and non-resident, and I think it'd be pretty similar across the board, is that non-resident, if you look at the racial groups, the white and black are probably being treated about the same as non-residents. Whereas if you look at the residents, they're more distributed according to what you would expect in Brookline, meaning that more white people are either stopped for traffic stops, stopped for field interrogation, and arrested than black or other racial groups.
But don't your statistics show that with respect to residents, maybe this is just another way of putting it, the benchmark is the census, and using that benchmark for residents, there is no disparities between white and black. For non-residents, we don't really have a benchmark, but it appears that based on a variety of benchmarks and guesses, that there is a disparity between white and black traffic stops and other items. Is that a fair way of putting it?
You could sort of put it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
So the recommendations are really based on that. So we need to explore why is that disparity or the differences there between non-residents and residents, especially where in the manual we have a mandate that residents and non-residents should be all treated equally. With respect to benchmarks that Bernard just mentioned, our report doesn't come down to whether or not those stops meet the benchmarks. And when I say benchmarks, that means what the driver, well, for traffic stops, it would be what the driver population estimate is. So the driver population estimate is not the same as census in Brookline, because there's different drivers from different areas of the surrounding communities coming into and through Brookline throughout the day. So we do need to get a benchmark study done. That could be either a windshield or observational study. That's one of our recommendations. It was done back in 2008, and it's probably out of date at this time by Northeastern, by Jack McDevitt, who spoke 2 weeks ago. And that should be put into the budget for fiscal year 2022. And the reason for that is because of the pandemic. Any study that we would do at this time would not give us an accurate estimate of the driver population. We also recommended that there should be more community outreach are community engagement, especially with the police department. And they have a lot of data about racial disparities. They publish an annual report. I think that the police department should be engaging with the community more often on that, and getting input from the community. So it's a two-way street. That will promote trust because there's factual information between the police department and the community. And with respect to the data, a lot of our report is on racial profiling is driven by data. We would like to see the police department keep the data up. There may be a recommendation for hiring more people to input data, because our data system is not geared for running reports. It's geared for police work. So all the data that our subcommittee has, a lot of the data, I should say, a lot of the data that our subcommittee has been asking the police department for has not been provided, because it takes a person manually to put in the data into a spreadsheet. So such as the field interview part of our report has not been done yet, because that has to be manually taken out from some of these reports that are used by the police department, but not used for generating reports for people like us. And we will need data if we are going to be going through certain changes and reforms, because that's how we could monitor whether or not these changes and reforms are effective that is recommended. So that's what we're proposing for racial profiling. With respect to mutual aid and mass events, we went through all the written documents that the police department has internally and externally with law enforcement agencies. One internal one that we found was the school department and the police department and also the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. That's probably known better as the round table. A lot, and also the school resource officer. A lot of that's going to be changed by the new law, the new Police Reform Act. So there will be, there needs to be changes with respect to that program. We also reviewed what occurred back in June during the Black Lives Matter march, when the Norfolk County Sheriff's Department was involved. That was provided under statutory authority that the police department engage with the Norfolk Sheriff's Department. We also made a recommendation that any law enforcement assisting the Brookline Police Department has to have a clearly identifiable badges on the exterior of the clothing, so that that particular law enforcement official can be identified. And with respect to the Police Reform Act, there are new provisions for mass events or protests or big gatherings where the police department and the police officer will have certain duties, such as reporting the use of force, submitting those reports to the commission for review.
By the way,
Yes.
can I say something about that? In my opinion, what the Reform Act has is very, very good. But I'd like to get a sense from the police department whether there are difficulties in actually implementing it. Can I ask you that, Dan? I mean, not for an answer now, but just to look at that and see, just so that we're aware of any difficulties in actually implementing, the requirements that they, meet with the organizers of the demonstration ahead of time and set up various protocols, et cetera.
That's not a problem. Actually, it's normal nowadays. It has been for a number of years to try to meet with the groups. And it's happened on protests that have been in Brookline since probably, I don't know, 2010 or so. We have just after Ferguson, we had a major demonstration at Coolidge Corner. We attempted to meet with the group leadership. I guess they had a little bit of a conflict. They did not meet with us, but on site, we did identify one of the leaders and we met with her and dealt with her through the event, and it went off without a hitch. So that's not going to add a lot. I think that's just the best practices on how to go handle a demonstration.
Okay.
But I will get something written up on it.
Okay. And that's just a little piece of information. That
Also, we do have it as, we do have an existing general order, which is number 42 on special events, that essentially does what the new Police Reform Act calls for, planning and the like.
And
But
we
that
do
needs
an
to be
operations.
obviously- Right.
And we do the operations plan ahead of time and also do an analysis after the fact, see what went right, what went wrong. And we've been following that for a while now.
Oh, okay. That's important information to emphasize. Again, along the lines of what someone said, that Brookline's been reforming and reimagining for years. Example.
So that particular general order obviously is going to have to be changed. And as Marty alluded to, the PCAC would do that or whatever. But I just want to bring out a fact that a lot of these provisions in the Police Reform Act is going to be effective July 1st, 2021. So in a few months, some of these things are going to be kicking into effect. So we should be aware of that. We should be prepared so that our existing practices are going to be conforming to what the statute calls for as of those effective dates. With respect to no-knock warrants, this is my last part of my presentation today. We just don't do any no-knock warrants in the town of Brookline. There was only one. Most of our warrants are administrative warrants. That means that to keep all the records of companies holding records for information or data. This is for investigation of, say, cyber crime or financial crimes and the like. With respect to, again, the new Police Reform Act, there is a new section about no-knocks. The no-knock warrant in the affidavits, the police officer has to attest that he or she has no reason to believe that there's minor children or adults over the age of 65 in the home in order to get a no-knock warrant. So if there are minor children or adults over 65, then the police will not be able to do that.
Okay.
One of the issues that the subcommittee had is trying to obtain all the information about search warrants that are done by the police department, and the police department had some difficulty in doing that, and we recommend that there should be a tracking system so that all search warrants that are obtained by the court by the Brookline Police Department that information is readily available, and we detail the type of information that would be required. And it would be basically a log that gives a short summary of what type of warrant it is, the case number for Brookline Police Department case, the object of the search, the race and gender of the person of interest, and the like. So that's basically my report. Any other
Right.
members want to chime in, they may.
Marty? And by the way, again, Paul's report is very well written, but very long. But still, I really urge people to review it and give him feedback. Marty, what's up?
Well, two things. The first is that I have suggested to Paul, and I'm not sure that this gets back to how much of the manual we're going to get to, the policy manual. I'm trying to come up with some ideas on how to highlight the need to be cautious about racial profiling in various places in the manual, not just various policies like motor vehicle stops, field interrogations, but also supervisory responsibilities. I'm having some trouble coming up with language for that. Things like being mindful of the town's commitment to being welcoming for diverse residents, that kind of thing. So that's number one. You know, I have looked through the manual and tried to highlight about 10 or 15 sections that something like that could be added. And if people have ideas on that, maybe send them to Paul, the copy to me or something like that. And the second thing is, in the same regard, I'm a big believer in two things. Number one, the need for a lot of discretion for law enforcement and even prosecutors, but also the need to give some guidelines and factors for that discretion that come from community values. And on one in particular, I've been very, for once, undecided for many years. And that's on the discretion whether to give a warning or a citation. I have given to Paul a little bit of language for the report, and he may not have looked at it yet. It was just, I think, 2 days ago, suggesting some criteria for that decision. That the current manual doesn't give much guidance for that. And things like the extent to which there was a public safety hazard, the extent to which maybe the person has a clean driving record, which can be ascertained by computer from the cruisers. Maybe the thing that I just mentioned about being mindful of the town's desire to be a welcoming community. Another one might be, what I think of, well, anyway, so here's my question. There's no doubt that the manual forbids giving priority or preference to residents. I've actually been undecided over the years whether that should be flat out forbidden or should it be one of the criteria that I'm talking about. And I don't want to get into a long discussion about that. We could probably discuss it for an hour. My suggestion would be, if people have thoughts on that, if that should be one factor out of maybe 6 in terms of how do you decide whether to give a warning or a citation, how do you feel about that? And basically have people send input to the Civil Rights Committee, because it is obviously something that could be prone to unconscious bias. So it's a delicate question. If that were not a question, then I'd have less difficulty with it. And I'd say that a community resident should be one factor in their favor on that decision. But it's,
Okay.
so that's my suggestion, is to give some feedback to Paul and the
Okay.
Civil Rights Committee.
Okay. I would, anticipating Michael Keaveney's reaction, or I think his reaction would be, I think we got to be very careful about suggesting to police that they need to be second guessing stops if the person stopped is black, or or some other characteristic. Rather, the focus should be, can you really justify this stop? Is there a real reason for the stop? Because if you start getting them to second guess themselves regarding the race of the person that they're looking at, I mean that seems to be just begging for a problem. So, but that's just my view. So
I'll just add in that that's.
I think the issue is a lot more complex than just saying don't do racial profiling. Is that Raj?
No, Michael Keaveney. I was just going to indicate that I think that's been well established in court. The decision for a fine or violation is in the hands of the officer, and I'm pretty sure that's been established in court prior. I don't know if Chief O'Leary can speak to that, but.
Okay, I just throw that out just so that we don't that we're careful about we don't miss the complexity of this. Any rate, anything else about the report? Yeah, and actually, Chief O'Leary, if you want to add some, your 2 cents to that, give it to Michael, and anyone, Michael or anyone else. So.
Okay.
Okay, let's go over to the next one, community outreach, youth, non-traditional roles. That's Casey.
Okay, so we've learned a lot about various aspects of work being conducted by the police department that relates to community outreach, youth, and non-traditional roles. We've heard feedback from folks in the community and folks involved in the work. We have recommendations that we've discussed and that I'll be putting into a preliminary report for our next subcommittee meeting. For Walk and Talk, working with Caitlin Starr to do additional outreach to youth in the community through the Teen Center, working on BHA focus groups to ensure Walk and Talk is the work they're doing with youth is meaningful and wanted. Recommending a joint mission statement on the goals and objectives, or an MOU between Brookline Police Department and Brookline Housing Authority related to the Walk and Talk program. Committing to annual or semi-annual surveys on the program and specific topics to ensure that the program is meeting the needs of residents. As a request from our BHA partners, I think they seemed reluctant to take on that. So that could be something that hopefully the police department and Caitlin's group could coordinate on going forward. Focus groups, regular focus groups with the BPD and BHA residents, and increased community meetings, presentations, and focus and meetings with board, Brookline Housing Authority board, resident groups, staff, and whatnot, again, to ensure that the program is meeting the goals and objectives that have been set forward. And based on the survey, the request for many to keep and expand the program, and particularly amongst the elderly residents in Brookline housing, and that 56% of residents are elderly that live in BHA. We'd like to see expanding the program to a 4th officer, with that officer assigned to the day shift to work with the elder affairs officer and focusing a lot of their efforts on dealing with residents and working with residents in BHA that are seniors. So that's Walk and Talk. In terms of the school resource officer, I'd like to suggest that our committee recommend a general order within the police department that outlines the school resource officer program and formalizes a bit the oversight, public school of Brookline involvement, requirements and limitations of the program, and addresses anything new that is related to the SRO and the Police Reform Act. Agreeing with much of what the Reimagining Committee discussed, including the SROs and the professional development training with the teachers, particularly as it relates to issues around school safety, racial justice, bullying, social media, online, usage of internet, and additional topics as they are relevant and emerging. The SRO to attend principal meetings at least twice a year, working with the supervisor of the SROs, the deputy superintendent of the community service division, meeting with the superintendent of schools to discuss the program, inviting the superintendent of schools or their designee to participate in future hiring and selection of SROs. And the SROs would be hosting, recommend that they host a parent forum for their AWARE program, which would introduce that program to parents with 6th graders before the 3-year program is initiated. And SRO and the BHA continuing discussions around the with impacted communities and students around the location of the SRO's office at the high school. Homelessness, we heard from some folks that are working with homeless in the community and identified the creation of a homelessness task force in Brookline to have a more comprehensive approach to homelessness. And we actually have already accomplished that. We've created the homelessness task force. It has met, and we've added some additional members to that task force. And I think there's a lot of promising work that can come out of that. So hopefully we accept that as a recommendation, since we've got to move forward with that. And lastly, on crisis intervention, again, we heard from folks that are doing the crisis intervention work, police department, and Elizabeth released a report earlier this week, which was tremendous, extremely thorough, much more than I feel I could do it at this point. And I would suggest that our committee defer to her findings and recommendations, and let that rest there. We still have ongoing work to do to look at domestic violence work that we're doing, and work around autism and working with individuals with various disabilities and developmental challenges. And so that work will continue. I don't know if Michael or Bernard have any additions.
I just say that with respect to domestic violence, there's a lot of talk about sending social workers to domestic violence calls or whatever, which I think is totally ridiculous. So I think that, and that's just my opinion, okay? Having actually worked on domestic violence in a previous life, I think the best thing to do is maybe just explain, what we do, what types of calls come in, the risks involved, and sort of use this as kind of a educational thing, as opposed to, I mean, unless you think there's some recommendations that we can make, I just don't see any that would make much sense. But
yeah, I agree with that, Bernard, and I think just educating our subcommittee and the larger committee, and including in our report, what that process is, that we do have a domestic violence unit. It does include a civilian domestic violence advocate, Doreen Gallagher, who's really wonderful, and what the process is for follow-up and support through the court process, and secure restraining orders, and what's in place, and working with the Norfolk County DA's office, and what services they can provide. I think that will help enlighten some of that discussion around making sure that victims are fully supported, and also have access to additional services for assistance after and during.
And also, to the extent that we can do this, at least some sense of what types of calls come in, what are the risks that whoever goes there is facing. And also, I think we need to just make the point that domestic violence is not just something that happens in let's say the housing authority buildings, but it's something that's across the spectrum. I mean, that seems to be an obvious point, but it's not as obvious to a lot of people as you would think. So
absolutely. So. Michael, do you have anything you want to add to?
Not really. I think we'll keep discussing things at our next subcommittee meeting. I did want to, one thing we had talked about in the past that you didn't mention, but just because you can't mention everything, I think, is that there are some calls about homelessness that probably the police department doesn't need to be responding to, and doesn't even want to respond to. And it doesn't really seem like other town departments want to either, even if it may in fact be more of a public health issue than a issue related to law. And so maybe, we talked about this, I don't think I'm speaking out of hand, but, recommending, obviously, this may not be the right moment for it exactly, but recommending some additional staff person in the public health department to respond to some of those concerns about homelessness that are not actually criminal, but are just more about supporting people. I assume I didn't say anything that we don't all agree with, but.
No, that's absolutely right. And that's, I think, been a large part of our discussion around homelessness and our subcommittee, and also during our initial task force meeting, was that, we're 24/7 operation, so we can respond if there's, a call and, somebody's trespassing or somebody needs assistance. We do that, and we will continue to do that. But certainly a lot of these folks have significant long-term problem solving that needs to occur, and that really should rest. I agree with perhaps the public health department and building out some type of support, and it'll be a collaborative approach, much like the hoarding task force that's in place. But I do agree that it's the more long-term approach to getting folks the help that they need, and also addressing some of the public health concerns of the community. Right, it's a two-part kind of process. Both seem to align more naturally with the health department, and I do recognize that they're short-staffed. They've just had some retirements, and they're also in the middle of managing a global pandemic. But it's certainly something that we should include in our report and put on the radar moving forward. Yeah.
The homelessness task force is really exciting. I see Paul's hand is raised, or I'm told.
Yes.
Okay, Paul, I'm sorry, I didn't have my chat box up, so, or what is it? Participants box.
I don't know if I misheard something, or maybe it wasn't in context about a social worker responding to a domestic violence incident.
No, I was saying that I've heard, I don't think this is a common thought, but I've heard people say that, why are police going to domestic violence calls? Why didn't you send a social worker? Because, or something, social service person, because, the real problems are, social service related. That's just something that we have to, I guess, respond to in some way, just that way of thinking about domestic violence.
Well, in the state law, it says, I think arrest in a domestic violence is either mandated or preferable. I haven't read the statute for a while.
Yeah.
On 209A, but the two police officers or the chief can correct me if I'm wrong. It used to be that way, and the state legislatures, changed it so that somebody, if there's probable cause, obviously, somebody needs to be arrested and taken out of the home or that living quarter for the safety of the victim. That's the way I understood it.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I agree with that. Absolutely, what you said. I think that's the way the police department operates, and it is the preferred response.
So we have, I guess, that's an important thing to include in the report, the statutory language, as another reason why we're stuck with police going after domestic violence calls. Elizabeth?
I think it is important. I think absolutely you're right, Paul. My understanding is that the domestic violence law is a mandated arrest. And I think we have worked really hard to not have social workers or mental health workers respond to domestic violence because it is just too dangerous. And I think we know that, and we worked very hard to make sure that this ended up where it belonged with law enforcement. It doesn't mean that they're not social service issues that need to be dealt with, but having been in charge of mental health workers who have been killed in the line of duty, I can tell you, and that was sending them to places we thought we knew. So this is not something that we should be very clear about this in the report. This is very important that we need our police in this kind of a situation. These people who are victims of this absolutely deserve to be protected. So I think we should be very strong on this issue.
I'm struck by the either or sounding name of this. I mean, I can easily imagine situations in which would make sense for a social service worker and a police to respond. I don't see why it's either or.
Not initially, Ron. When you do not know what you are walking into, there is no place for a social worker to be walking into that home. Once it's secure, I think there's no question we can get social services in there as quickly as possible. But it's like sending a 25-year-old social worker into a situation where they are not prepared to know how to respond when there's violence happening. This is just not. This is about protecting our mental health workers and our
I
social
hear the
workers as
importance of the
well.
police. I just was a little concerned about it being only police, at least in terms of follow-up.
It's never only police in terms of follow-up, or it shouldn't be. That should not, and that's why we have the unit we have, which is about getting the help in there that needs to be in there, because there's a lot of help. So no, it's not. But I think the question is, why don't we just send a social worker? That's just dangerous. It's absolutely dangerous for everybody concerned.
Okay.
Yeah,
Marty
I
had his
agree.
hand up. Yeah, I'm sorry. Dwayne, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. I was the director of emergency family shelters, and I would never send my social workers or frontline staff into domestic violence or into a violent situation. It sounds good on paper, but the harsh reality is, that's not a good look. That's dangerous. That's irresponsible. In the real world, no, that should never happen. And I think we should be very clear that domestic violence and violent situation is not a place for social workers. So thank you, Chad.
Marty, did you have something?
I had a couple of things. I'll try to remember them all, but I don't disagree with that. And another thing to remember is the only, actually DPW and police and fire are the only, I think the only town departments that are 24/7, 365 in town. So we're not going to have social workers available 24/7, 365. So that's another thing. And the other problem is that we're an outlier in the world on the number of guns per civilian. So, that's another problem with both traffic stops, domestic calls, mental health calls. Is we're a strange society, and we're stuck with it for a while, and at least in for another generation or two. The two things I did want to add on the earlier discussion of this are, I'm pretty certain that the mandatory arrest is in the state statute for somebody with an outstanding restraining order, but not for mandatory arrest for anyone with a probable cause. And I am familiar with the town policy, which is pretty strong for a preferred arrest. I actually think it might be too strong. And I've had cases where the alleged victim is begging not to make an arrest. And I think under some circumstances, there could be probable cause with a better screening process. I don't think it should be 100. It gets back to what I said before about discretion. I think there ought to be some factors to consider for the discretion, especially if it's something with no apparent injuries, and it's going to be the sole breadwinner that's taken out of the house. I don't know, but
Okay. Yeah, Elizabeth
that's it.
Is jumping up with her hand.
I do believe, Marty, that there are judges on call for emergency restraining orders in DV, domestic violence situations, to actually, if that's necessary in order to get the arrest. But I don't know, Dwayne, you may actually have a more recent experience with that, but my understanding is that you can get a judge any day or night to give you an emergency restraining order if that's necessary.
But that's separate from the arrest.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
But
true, and I'm not going quite that far. I'm not saying that, I don't have a problem with preferred arrest, but again, I'd like criteria for the discretion.
Okay.
And the other thing I would say with the 911 calls, remember, these are they can be lethal situations. There is no time for anything other than immediate response. And so that's the other thing, that's what our police do. They do immediate response, and that's really important here.
Yeah. And maybe there should be some language in there to the police to take these calls seriously, because you hear about incidents across the country where, police seem to sort of sally up to the door and shooting begins. So, but anyway, let's move on. You finished, Casey? Okay. So next is Elizabeth. It's mental health and substance misuse.
Sorry,
Hey,
I was just getting warmed up, Bernard.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I can just say on TV, some of my most horrific outcomes have been women who've been murdered. And it's just, this is not something to be messed around with.
Yeah, no, I've seen that too. Hey, by the way, could you, in your report, I think you need to explain the word misuse. I mean,
Yes.
let's not talk about it, but just explain where that comes from. So, okay.
Yeah. The terms here change a lot in mental health, and we'll try to explain them because there's a lot of lingo that gets everybody mixed up.
Yeah.
Most of the reason it changes is an attempt to destigmatize mental health. That's what mental illness. We're trying to help people not have such a stigma. So we've had a great a subcommittee process, and I really appreciate input from everybody. We've had, I want to just say, Michael, that your input on that committee has been really helpful, and as well as on personnel and from the police department as well. We've gotten good input. We had our open mic this week, which was very helpful to us, and really appreciate it. And we've gotten input from the co-chairs of the task force, our task force sister. So sister subcommittee. So that's been really helpful. Our recommendations really come out of some basic realities that we were pushed into accepting as we did our work. And the first one is that the police department, the 911 call, is the only remaining true 24/7 crisis responder for any call, for any person, for any reason. And whether we like it or not, the mental health system, the behavioral health system, is built on the premise that that 911 call will be there. And so it's not possible to think about pulling that foundational cornerstone of how the whole system is built out, which brings us to the issue of we really have to work with the police around this issue of working with people with mental illness and substance misuse, with the goal of making sure that we don't make their crises worse by getting them in the wrong place. We don't want them to end up in the criminal justice system or a hospital ER for hours. We want them to get the help they need. The other reality that we ended up needing to deal with was that Brookline is too small for its own self-standing Brookline specific programs that are, that you would have in a big city, for example, but it's too big to not have specialized interventions. It's not like we have one in a blue moon. We have about 4 to 5 calls a day that involve some sort of mental health, wellness check, intoxication, something that has to do with that. So the department has been very creative in trying to develop specialized expertise within its officers to respond, recognizing that they have to work with systems that are outside of Brookline directly sometimes. And they've been doing this over 20 years. The main way they have done this is by the crisis intervention team, which the essence of that is the de-escalation training. And we are very unusual in Brookline that 100% of our officers are trained in CIT, and 100% of our dispatchers are trained in mental health first aid. And a lot of that has happened with grant funding, which will eventually run out in the next couple of years. And one of the recommendations is that we absolutely continue financial and operational support for that training. It's critical, both in the initial training, which is very intensive, 40 hours plus a week, 40 hours plus with scenario training, and then their ongoing training opportunities as well. It's both in addictions and in mental illness and de-escalation. And because of that de-escalation training, there have been very different outcomes in Brookline than we have heard in the national press. And we try to outline at least a couple of those incidents in our report. And we are really thankful to our officers for responding the way they did. And the families are too. The families are very appreciative. One of the things about the CIT grant that the department has is it has an embedded 1 FTE of a social worker. One of the recommendations is that that FTE of a social worker be put into the budget as a standing position within the police department. That person is able to respond, co-respond with officers whenever safe, or be a resource to immediately pick up a social service, have expertise, or to make a linkage. I think a second FTE would give us a lot more penetration in terms of frequency of availability to the officers. There's a lot of trust in the officers with the current emergency services team, which is the Boston Emergency Services team. And the officers really do know what they're doing. They're very sophisticated. We have a highly trained elite group of people there, and they work really effectively. So there are some things we could do also around that response, which is like some improvements in terms of telehealth for officers directly to the best, explore some co-response models that we already do that sometimes with the existing social worker, but are there ways to expand that? There might be. So there are some front end things. But truly, when you look at that, the front end of the system works pretty well. So with some basic improvements, supports for maintaining the successes and building on that, that's good. The problem comes, the real problem comes with the aftercare linkages. And the department, the police department, has done a lot to mitigate the problems of aftercare, but aftercare problems happen for really 3 reasons. One, the client doesn't follow up, and sometimes that's because of their illness. The provider misses what's going on and doesn't engage the client, and they don't connect, or the system has a barrier so that you can't get an appointment, or their insurance doesn't cover it. And so the department tries to mitigate that with a roundtable format. You've heard about that before, but we believe that there are some real opportunities here with Brookline to lay out a roadmap for a public-private partnership with some of these world-class medical facilities near us who like to work with Brookline. The Medicaid is rolling out a new ambulatory care redesign, and it's going to be very focused around the emergency services teams. And so I think one of the major recommendations will be for Brookline to explore as a town a public-private partnership to expand immediate mental health care aftercare linkages. Places where people can get seen within 24 hours or immediately. That's not the jail, not the emergency room, but a true mental health type clinic. So I think there's some real opportunities there. We fully support the homelessness task force. That's one of we also had that recommendation, but Casey's team already got it started, so we can just say we completely agree with it. There's also a role for the town in terms of state advocacy with our legislators around some of the barriers are systemic around emergency services teams not taking all comers because they're of insurance issues. So we could actually ask the Division of Insurance to make sure that all insurers in Massachusetts require insurers to cover emergency services, for example, for psychiatric and substance abuse crises. with emergency services teams, mobile emergency services teams who can do things like that. And we recommend that. That's more of a town recommendation. The other thing that came up that I think is really critical is that retaining our officers, retaining and promoting our officers is critical, because linkages happen because of relationships. And when you have an officer who has served in Brookline for 20 years and knows the clients and knows the providers, it really helps make the whole thing work. That's the fabric that keeps things from falling apart. And so we cannot overstate how important it is to retain our officers. In addition, I would just say it's smart because we've invested all of this money into training them in CIT. There are very few departments that are completely trained like this. So we do want to keep them here. So any policies, procedures, compensation, things that we need to do to improve retention and promotion of our officers will absolutely help how we serve people with mental health and substance misuse. And then last, I think the community can do a lot here. I think these are, when there is a bad outcome, these are tragedies all around for everybody. And, you know, before technology was so fast, we used to always wait 24 to 72 hours before everybody started deciding what happened. And I think there's a real opportunity for the community to support our police in just taking a big deep breath. If there is a bad outcome, no matter what we do, there may be, these are really difficult situations. There could be system and person failures when we have a bad outcome. Be great if the community could take a big deep breath and say, let's just get the facts before we start pointing fingers at people. These are tragedies. So it's important to ask our community to really support everybody who's trying to do the job on the front line, and it doesn't always work out. As a psychiatrist, I know that a lot. Sometimes you're the first one that they point their fingers at, but you just need to ask people to hold their fire until they can get some information. So those are the primary recommendations of the committee, I think.
Good, thank you. And I really urge people to read the report. It's a long report, but not extremely long. Read it for a variety of reasons, but one of which, see if there are ways in which, you know, the report's enthusiasm for the great programs we have here in Brookline and the great job the police does with respect to those programs causes a sort of over exuberance. I mean, I found a few places where I think we need to tone it down and even though, you know, great work is being done, you know, we don't want to appear to be sort of PRing some of this stuff, to use a term other people have used. So, but definitely read this as well as the other reports and give comments. Elizabeth doesn't necessarily have to accept all the comments, but she needs to read them and be mindful of why they're being proposed. So. Okay.
Can I just respond one thing?
Sure.
I don't want to make that in a PR report, but I will tell you my context for this is having been a state commissioner of mental health and working with police departments across the Commonwealth. I can honestly tell you that we are really fortunate when it comes to people with mental illness and substance abuse in Brookline. And I remember a case, actually. I think, Dan, you were the chief, and we had one client murder another client. And there is no town that I would have rather dealt with that horrible situation in Brookline. I mean, the sophistication of our police and our chief, Dan, at the time, to take a horrible situation and get control and safety and calm everybody down and let us figure out what we had to do. From a mental health commissioner perspective, it was incredible. So I say that because we don't even realize how lucky we are here. I've dealt with that in other communities, and it wasn't even close to the same kind of response or care that those people got, that the people around that person got. It was really incredible.
Yeah. So
I have real quick. It'll be real quick, Bernard.
Okay.
You know, to jump on what Elizabeth said, I've seen Brookline police officers deal with someone with a mental health issue and I stood back and watched, and it was excellent. That particular officer, that particular incident was something that should have been on tape that could be shown. It's something that's happening with this process that officer was well prepared. And that's something I saw with my own eyes. And I mentioned that to a couple people here and there, talking about that, you know, maybe I should have reported it to a supervisor, but when you see good law enforcement, it's something special. That's one thing that I want to say. The other thing is that one of the struggles with, you know, mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness that officers will have to face. The chronically homeless is a population with dual diagnosis that many times have substance abuse / mental health issues, and that's an interesting intersectionality when we think about how all these things hit an officer at one time. So anything that we could continue to do to support the training and the reinforcement and the orientation, how to manage individuals with mental health issues that many times happen with chronically homeless folks and what have you, that is an excellent investment. And the one thing I would like to ask you, Elizabeth, is that you said the problem with Brookline is too big and too small at the same time. I know when I was working in Boston around the chronically homeless, we had the best team. Do you believe that Brookline is too small to be able to have a best-like team to kind of deal with people with severe mental health issues?
No, in fact, we met with the best team and they serve Brookline and we can do more with them. And you're right about that, Dwayne, completely. That's the place where we can improve, right? We can make that an even stronger and better response. I mean, they already are involved, they already respond, but I think there's room there to improve things. And you probably also know the team too, Dwayne, the homeless outreach team. You probably have worked with them too. And we do work with them too. But again, those are places where we want to build and utilize that more, utilize that foundation more. I agree with you.
And for those who know, it's Boston Emergency Services team. And it deal with individuals that may harm themselves and harm others. And that's when we will call the best team. So like if the blessing is they serve Brookline, and to kind of maximize those services and kind of coordinate those services with law enforcement and other services so we could kind of provide the best services possible. Thank you.
And by the way, that's another reason for people to read the program, because read the report, because the report does go into some detail with respect to, you know, our relationship with BEST meeting, and, you know, came out of the meeting with BEST. And it really is, it's amazing what we do and what we can do. But just be aware that there are a lot of naive people here in Brookline who think that, you know, this stuff is not happening and it shouldn't happen. So anyway, that's my opinion. Marty, I see your hand raised. You're muted. Can't hear you.
I think you did that.
No,
instead of saying being brief, you just muted me.
No, I wouldn't do that.
All right. So anyway,
to you, I wouldn't do that.
yeah, right. Two quick questions. I've looked at, and I actually have a couple of minor sections to comment on the mental illness report from Elizabeth, and I'll send that as soon as we're done. One question was, there is some mention of an officer named Jennings, and as I recall from listening for some weird reasons to the select board meeting last night, he got an award. Bernard maybe should send, I've added a sentence noting that he got an award, and Bernard might give the name of it. So that's a minor point. The second question is, I don't see a report on the domestic cases. Has that been circulated yet?
Domestic violence cases, you mean?
Right.
I think Casey's still working on that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, okay.
That's okay, because I actually have a thought on that that's going to be similar to what I said a few minutes ago about guiding discretion. And the other thing I'm going to send Elizabeth is I have suggested a couple of changes on the arrest policy for mental illness cases. I did have a case, and I don't know, Chief O'Leary probably doesn't remember, a few years ago while he was chief, of an arrest at, what's it called, HRI on Babcock Street, is that the name of it? Yeah, and that has given me one idea about the arrest policy on mental illness, and I'll send a copy of that to Chief O'Leary to look at it as well. So I'll send that as soon as we're done tonight. I think I've finished that's the main thing in that report, other than Officer Jennings.
Yeah. And by the way,
Thanks.
Elizabeth put a letter from the mother of a child who was helped by Officer Jennings in the report. I think it's appropriately there, but it's used to show the impact of this officer on her child, and used to show, the value of, the programs we have here in Brookline. I would put that in a footnote though, but that's just my opinion. So, okay, anything else on mental health and substance misuse? Okay, moving right along. At 6:58, be aware of this. Elizabeth, again, personnel.
Okay. So you don't have the report yet, but we're trying to pull all of our pieces together. So the first piece is on civil service. We started with Mel Kleckner's memo back in July. We're looking at laying out the pros and cons for staying in or coming out of civil service. There is as part of the new state law, a commission will be reporting back in September about civil service. So one of the recommendations is going to be to get that report back before we would actually, and we can look at making changes, but we need to take into account, I think, what changes there may be in civil service before we proceed with changes. As part of that, we also tapped into Michael Downey's really extensive experience with Human Resources Division at the state, where he worked with civil service, and he was really helpful to us in pulling together understanding the current civil service and what it means, and speaking with we've spoken to Chief Brooks in Norwood, who has been through this before, and one of the things that was really important was talking to the union early before we start making recommendations. And I want to thank Michael Keaveney for coming and talking to us. It was really helpful, and I think out of that we realized that the problem is not only with recruiting, the department already has diversity recruiting strategies, which we would recommend they continue with, and also maybe things like a police cadet program, but it's also about retention and promotions. And as you remember, for mental health and substance abuse, that's very important. Well, it's also really important for personnel. And that includes, how do you retain officers? How do you keep people here? And how do you help them move forward? And so there are some recommendations in there around assessment centers, dealing with some Quinn issues, which are obviously things that have to be negotiated. And I also think that there's an element of retention and promotion that has to do with the community, which is our community, making sure that we let our officers know how much we appreciate them. And we don't want officers to leave Brookline because people in Brookline are not respectful to our officers. And so there is an issue here that I think it's something when people say, what can I do to help? This is one thing every community member can do to help, is to remember that most of these men and women, many of them have lived in Brookline. Some of them have lived here their whole lives, actually. And they're trying to do their best job under sometimes very challenging circumstances. So the community attitude makes the difference in being able to retain our officers. The next section is governance. And we have a weak chief model with our civilian police commissioners, the select board. We We did spend quite a bit of time on the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee and recommend that that is a change to the governance to support the police commissioners as they are. We also did a revision of the mission statement, which will have to go forward for a vote. And the other piece of governance is around accreditation. We are one of 91 community police departments in the Commonwealth. That's not very many out of 360 some that are 360 communities. We're only 91 that are accredited by the state. And the new state law actually pushes towards accreditation a little bit. So we actually are probably ahead of the curve. We've been accredited since 2014, 2015, something like that. And it was a lot of improvements were made and a lot of things were codified as part of that process that are going to help us with already be adhere to meet the state law standard, the new state law standard. So we would recommend we continue that, obviously. We also are in charge of officer health and wellness, and there are several reasons to talk about this. One, hurt officers hurt people. And so we have to make sure that our officers are healthy and well. People may not know there are 2 state laws that actually speak to this. The heart law, which is about officers who they have a much higher rate of heart disease and hypertension. And there's a no smoking law. Officers are, there's a law that prohibits them from smoking too. But officers are under tremendous stress. They die younger than the average, about significant lower life expectancy. And about 25% deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so when people are dealing with these symptoms, they're not probably able to, we know that you're not able to make as mindful and balanced and thoughtful a decision. So helping our officers have the supports they need to deal with their own health and wellness not only helps them personally, but it also helps them make better decisions in the field. And so there is a really serious reason for us to take this very seriously. And there is a big section of the new state law that also speaks to this. And it's because it's critical. It's one of the 6 pillars of Obama's 21st policing. And it's no accident that it stands on its own as a pillar. So what do we do already? There are things that we do that are required in the state law now. CISM is probably the most central piece, which is a critical incident stress management. And we participate with other communities and towns in CISM teams who respond to critical incidents, like an incident like happened in Newton, for example. That would be like a critical incident where the people of the CISM teams would come together and assist that police department. As you can imagine, Brookline has such a culture in doing this because of our CIT training. Our officers are really prepared to think about how to deal with critical incidents because of their training. So we are an integral part of that, those CISM teams in our area. And our CIT culture helps us have an awareness of how to do this. We also do debriefing and diffusing, and we're one of the few departments that includes our dispatchers in the debriefing. It's really, if you think about it, sometimes the dispatcher themselves is also traumatized by taking a call and having to deal with it on the line while they're sending out the team. So a lot of places don't include their dispatchers. We do. It's really important to them. There are programs that we partner with, such as the LEADER program, where these are all things we think should be supported and even magnified if possible. The LEADER program, which is a partnership where police officers can get treatment. And there are peer supports as well. And one of the things that I think we need to think about in our community is supporting our police officers who have families. Some of our police officers' children have been shunned and called names because their parents work in the police department in Brookline, and that is just wrong. In our schools, the children of our police should be taken care of just like every other child. And just because somebody may not agree with a police officer, we really need to look out for that. So peer supports also means helping our police officers who are parents deal with how to help their own families. They're worried about their own families and what the impact is on their children. The other thing that's interesting is when you talk about morale being really important to help police officers hang in there and feel well and supported in their work. Sometimes when you put out your hand and help somebody else, it helps your own morale. And so some of the officers have been doing that with veterans. And it's been quite a good thing for our officers, and those kinds of opportunities for our officers to do the kind of community service and be part of that in our community. I think we want to make opportunities like that possible and support them in that work. We talked about increasing the chaplaincy and counseling resources available to our officers within our community. It's also a way for our faith organizations to be more supportive of the work that our officers are doing. Let me think. So those are all things that we feel need to be financially supported and operationally supported in policies and procedures as we go forward. And then health issues as well. The officers really need support around just basic health stuff, you know, health screenings and all sorts of things. Our subcommittee is also responsible for officer training, and the CIT training is like that core of that, but there are other aspects of training that need to be supported and continued. I would also add that this is also in the new state law that officers need to be trained in de-escalation, and we are obviously way ahead of that. We have 100% trained in more than even basic de-escalation, in addition to CPR and everything else. But that is going to be a requirement in the state law too. So those will be the recommendations from that section.
Okay, thank you.
No
Hey, can I add one thing?
Yep.
And actually a recommendation. You know, we talk about you know, officers' children being bullied in school. I mean, it's similar to, you know, Black kids being bullied in school. And I think that, you know, we have to sort of look at that as, you know, that's what kids do. You know, I mean, it's not making excuses for it, but, you know, a middle school kid, I mean, they're hardwired to be jerks. So I think that we have to be careful not to, you know, sort of set out children of police officers as somehow, you know, being unique or particularly vulnerable, or although, you know, to some degree they are. But I think that, you know, we need to maybe recommend that because of that problem, which sort of fits into the general problem of bullying and you know, kids being jerks, and that's a scientific term, a legal term, you know, that the schools need to, you know, really be sort of sensitive to this and responsive to it. You know, so maybe the recommendation should be outreach to the schools to deal with this issue, but, you know, see it as, you know, a general problem that we have in schools where, you know, kids will be kids, and it's developmental. It's not anything else. So I see.
That's a good point, Bernard. I was just going to say there's one thing I would say about bullying in the schools. When you look at the public health outcomes of children who bully have much worse health outcomes in terms of their lifelong employment, achievement, and criminal involvement than those who get bullied. We worry about the victims, but actually the other side of it is, and I always remind kids of this and parents of this, the kids who are doing the bullying are ultimately at much higher risk.
Yeah. And by the way, I didn't mean to suggest that, you know, this that you know, kids of police, you know, don't have some special issues, but I think that, you know, we want to recommend to the school system that they think about this, you know, and use their understanding of developmental issues with kids, as well as, you know, the need to just crack down on this type of stuff. So, Marty, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I know it's late. I'll just make two quick comments. One is that on the retention and promotion issue, and I can't remember who I've talked to about this, whether it's Elizabeth or Chief O'Leary. I was very intrigued to hear that we have a problem on retaining officers, especially officers of color, partly because the pay differential is not as big in as some other departments in terms of applying to be sergeant, for instance. And I'm hoping that there can be some ideas in the report on how to address that. That's number one. And specifically, and I don't remember again if I've mentioned this to anybody, I wonder if there could be a way to encourage Metco students to apply as officers in Brookline. And I don't even remember the status of a resident preference. I think that got eliminated a few years ago. Anyway, we can't discuss these very much now, but I am concerned about the lack of superior officers of color. And now I think I understand why. And part of it may be because our officers, and I'm happy about this, get quite a bit for private details. And maybe that's partly why the salary bump is not as big as some other jurisdictions, but it's a complicated issue. Anyway, that's it for now.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, hey, I think this has been a good meeting. I hope people have a sense of how this report is coming together. We're going to have to use our drafting committee to sort of make it a little more coherent. But yeah, I'm satisfied that we're going to get to the finish line with something really good. So I'll be in touch with the chairs of the subcommittees to sort of work with them to make sure that we're going in the same direction. And I'd also like to just add to mention to Casey that I may have emailed you this, so I apologize if I'm repeating. But Bill McGroarty, our Veteran Affairs Officer, deals with a lot of people in crisis who are veterans, and I think you're nodding, so I must have already mentioned this, or you knew about it anyway. So the veterans in this town are a significant number, and they have significant problems, and we can't forget to forget them in our work here. So we scheduled time for public comment. I think our public has left, although there are two people still here, Savion Cohen and Al Mustafa. If they want to speak, please just raise your hand. If not, we'll end this meeting.
Sorry. So about the survey, assuming that's going to happen, is Elizabeth going to coordinate? Should I expect an email from her, or what?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll send you an email, Michael.
Okay, not just me though.
Right? No, yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
Thanks.
I've already reached out to the people that did the Newton survey. So hopefully I'll hear soon.
Terrific.
That's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody, and thanks Elizabeth. Clearly you're doing a ton of work, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, we all appreciate what everyone's doing. Hey, Michael, could you give us a contact person who you'd like to work on this?
I'm going to guess that's probably going to be me, but
okay.
And I have no problem with that.
Okay. We can work with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else?
This is Devin.
Pardon me? I don't see anyone looking to make
Devin wanted to say something.
I'm sorry, Devin, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to, we do have two attendees at this time, and neither of them have used the Q&A or hand raise feature to indicate that they'd like to make a comment. I do want to just wrap up logistically and go over a couple of the dates that were mentioned to make sure I have everything clear. This group will meet next Wednesday, which means that I need to post the agenda on Friday because there is a Monday holiday. So that pushes up the open meeting law deadline. So if there's anything in particular that you would like on the agenda, I will need that tomorrow by noon, and then your backup materials on Friday.
Okay. By the way, Devin, you have to post on Thursday, right?
No, because the meeting is Wednesday, so I'll need to post on
Oh,
Friday.
sorry.
That's all right.
Thinking of another meeting.
Yes, you've got a few of those on the calendar. So the other point that I want to make about next week is that this group will need to have a hard stop at 6:30 so that we can transition the big stream for the task force's public hearing, which I'm sure most of you will likely watch or attend. That's going to be their full public hearing on their full report. So your meeting will be at 5 and theirs will be at 7. Then this group will meet again on the 24th at 5 o'clock.
So I'm sorry, wait a minute. So our hard stop is, I thought it's 6:45, not 6 o'clock.
I said 6:30, but 6:45 is technically the drop
Okay.
dead. They need at least 15 minutes to be able to transfer everything over. So I figured if I said 6:30, then we'd really end at 6:45 because that's how this group rolls.
Okay. Oh, don't get snarky.
The 24th is your public hearing. Do you want to keep that start time at 5 o'clock?
As opposed to starting earlier?
Or later?
Or later. Actually, I'd like to keep it at 6. I have a meeting afterwards. You want to go to 6:30?
You mean 5?
No. My question is, do you want to keep your same start time? This group consistently starts at 5 o'clock.
Right. I would like to keep it, but that's just for my needs.
Yeah. So one question is how many members of the public can attend that early? It may be easier for many members of the public to have a little more buffer time between their work days. Just raising that as an issue.
Would 5:30 be better? I mean, I have another meeting at 8. I mean, it's actually a filming, so. Would that be better?
How would you feel about 6?
6. I then have a hard stop at 7:30. Okay, but let's do it at 6. You don't need me.
All right.
We're gonna have a regular meeting that night too.
No, that's going to be our regular meeting.
But
a hearing. Well, I guess after the hearing, assuming a lot of people won't be speaking, or at least it won't take more than half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, we can have our meeting and vote or agree on the things that are proposed for changes to our documents.
It depends on what's proposed. We might need a little time to digest, depending on the feedback.
Right, which is the point of your meeting on March 1st. Right.
Right.
So I just want to clarify those times so I can get everything posted.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the comments I think are going to be either stylistic issues, which are substantive sometimes, and things like that, or proposals to throw everything out and do something else. And I think we can deal with those fairly quickly. Okay. Anything else, Devin?
So have we decided that we're starting at 6 and going an hour and a half, and that the voting will happen at our meeting on March 1st?
Yeah. Well, if we can agree, if we have time and we can agree on certain things on the 24th, we'll do it. Otherwise, we'll take up things on March 1st.
Okay.
I think you just might need a little bit more time then if you're going to do that. So I would recommend starting at 5:30.
5:30? What do you think about that, Ron?
I can deal with 5:30.
Okay. 5:30 then.
I've also noticed, based on the 5 subcommittee public hearings that were held last week from the task force, people are a lot more accessible. So they are logging in at all sorts of times, upwards of 40, 50 people sometimes in these kind of random timed hearings. So that is a silver lining of the pandemic, is obviously there's a lot more opportunity for engagement in these types of meetings.
All right, good.
Okay.
Okay.
If anyone has particular things for the agenda, just get that over to me tomorrow.
Okay, I think that's the plan. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Right. Thanks,
That is the end of the meeting.